Hello everybody, it's Mr. G coming at you with another Misconceptions in History. And today we're going to be looking at the different types of aircraft carriers. I'm doing this as kind of an introduction into the history of aircraft carriers, and I wanted you to be able to understand the many different varieties of aircraft carriers that have been built over the years. So with that, I'm only going to strictly go over the different types. We will be looking at the history of the aircraft carrier in the near future. Also, I want to point out that we're going to be not doing things like catapult launched ones in this episode, or like submarine aircraft carriers, even the completely crazy and unconventional designs such as the airship aircraft carriers and the airplane aircraft carriers. I will be doing the air ones when we do a series on lost airplanes, but we're strictly going to be looking at the typical ships that we normally associate as an aircraft carrier. Now, the earliest known type of aircraft carrier was actually a balloon carrier. Now, balloons have been important for military usage for centuries. In fact, the earliest man use of a military balloon dates back to the French Revolutionary War. So they were important vessels for observation and things like that until the aircraft became the main reconnaissance weapon. Next, we have seaplane tenders. And basically what this was an aircraft carrier that didn't launch from the deck. This was not a catapult cruiser or anything like that. This was basically a ship that carried a complement of float planes, and they could be deployed on the ocean where they would take off from the ocean and be retrieved on the ocean. Next, we have what's to move to the flat deck carrier, which is what all modern aircraft carriers have. And the first we're going to look at is the fleet carrier. And the fleet carrier is the basis of all modern aircraft carriers. We see this as far back as the early 19-teens, when we see the beginnings of a main aircraft carrier that was designed for a purpose around a fleet, and it later develops into an attack unit like we see today. And depending on where you're at in the world, fleet carriers can be all different kinds of sizes, but typically it is the mainstay of a navy. It is the biggest, most powerful ship they have, and thus it gets the term fleet carrier. Now, after the fleet carrier, we have what's known as the light aircraft carrier. And there's still a few navies in the world that operate this, but basically, these are traditionally half to two-thirds the size of a navy's fleet carrier. Now, the light aircraft carrier is actually going away in the world, as most are either going towards what we would consider a helicopter carrier, which we'll talk about in a moment, or their light aircraft carrier has become their fleet carrier. And in fact, at the time of recording this, there's only 3 navies that still technically have light aircraft carriers, and all of those are based on designs from other nations or purchased from another nation, and that's kind of how it got its light aircraft carrier classification. Next, we have the escort carrier, which is a very unique class. With the exception of a handful of ships, almost all of them were built during World War II. Their design was very simplistic. They were not fast. In fact, a lot of them didn't even have what's known as the island, the command center, on board the ship, that nice little tower area you always see on an aircraft carrier. And they were very limited on what they could do, but they were quick to be built or converted, and they really served an important role during World War II. But none have been built since World War II, and they're not even in service anymore. Then we have the sea control ship, which was supposed to replace the light aircraft carrier and the escort class, and the idea was a type of aircraft carrier that could hold helicopters and launch the earliest versions of VTOL aircraft. And while it was never built due to budgetary constraints, because it was going to be a massive ship, what we do have instead are helicopter carriers. And helicopter carriers are basically the size of what we would consider to be a light aircraft carrier or an escort class aircraft carrier, with the purpose being initially to strictly only carry rotary wing aircraft, helicopters, and eventually they do add on fixed-wing aircraft such as VTOL capable, like the Harrier jet and things like that, and the F-35 now, or in some cases they have short takeoff for certain aircraft that don't need to do VTOL, and they can do a short takeoff instead. Now, there are subclasses for the helicopter carrier. There's anti-submarine roles, the most popular being the amphibious assault role, but multiple nations have this, and it actually involving VTOL aircraft is the most popular way to modify and enhance the capabilities of a helicopter carrier. Now, there are a few unconventional aircraft carriers that really never made it off the drawing board, such as the flight deck cruiser, which was basically to take a cruiser, remove everything but the forward 2 guns, and place an aircraft carrier deck on there. They did the exact same thing. The same thing in the 80s with the Iowa class when they were doing the refits, with the interdiction class assault ship, which was basically to remove the rear turrets and put an aircraft carrier deck on the rear of it. And we're talking something maybe capable of launching a Harrier. We're not talking like an F-18 or F-14. So hopefully that gives you a basic understanding of different types of aircraft carriers, so when I start talking about the history of the aircraft carrier, you kind of have a better understanding. I will be talking about some of the cooler stuff, like the plan to make an aircraft carrier out of an iceberg, and things like that. So I hope this provided you with at least a basic understanding of the aircraft carrier and the different types. I know there's a lot more to it, so please don't come at me for that. I'm just trying to create something simple and informational for people. So that's all I have for today. Next week I will be doing probably a two-parter on the history of the aircraft carrier. I will do one later on the aircraft carriers. But thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you all in the next time.